The Amazing Spider-Man film series has always felt like a missed opportunity to me. Ever since the series was announced back in 2010, following the cancellation of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4, this new take on the iconic Marvel superhero never managed to quite reach the high level of potential that it clearly had. Despite the tremendous casting of actors Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, and genuinely tremendous moments sprinkled throughout both 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man and its 2014 sequel, I think it's fair to say that for one reason or another, this franchise never managed to live up to its expectations. In a previous video, we discussed the history of how the Amazing Spider-Man film series came to be, the production of both movies, and how the lukewarm response to The Amazing Spider-Man 2, coupled with its underwhelming box office performance, made Sony Pictures scrap their plans for a sequel, in favour of teaming up with Marvel to bring Peter Parker over to the MCU, with Tom Holland donning the iconic red and blue costume in 2016's Captain America Civil War and beyond. However, the decision to scrap these plans extended far beyond a sequel to The Amazing Spider-Man 2, as between 2013 and 2015, Sony Pictures had not only already outlined plans for an Amazing Spider-Man 3, but they were also actively developing a number of spin-off projects set in the same continuity, aiming to create a Spider-Man-centric cinematic universe that would become a box office juggernaut just like the MCU had. Now, while these plans obviously never came to fruition, the history behind projects like Venom, the Sinister Six, Silver and Black, and The Amazing Spider-Man 3 are truly fascinating, and in this video I want to explain the story of just how they all came to be, discuss the original ideas and plans for each of these films, and the factors that ultimately led to them either being drastically changed during their development or never seeing the light of day entirely, and how this once ambitious plan for an Amazing Spider-Man cinematic universe ultimately faded away into obscurity. Before we continue though, just a quick reminder to leave a like on this video if you enjoy it, and subscribe to Owen Likes Comics so you don't miss out on any future videos. 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man proved to be a modest success for Sony Pictures. Despite a quick turnaround following the demise of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man series, the film under the direction of Mark Webb was largely received well and made a respectable profit upon its July 2012 release, encouraging the studio that there was a clear future for this new take on the classic hero. As Sony quickly put in place plans for a sequel, re-signing the likes of Webb, Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone to new multi-film deals, something else happened in 2012 that I think had a fundamental impact on the studio's plans for future Spider-Man films: the Avengers. You see, when the original Spider-Man film was in development, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was still very much in its infancy, with only Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2 being released. And although it started to become clear that Marvel had major plans for their live-action motion pictures, the extent of this didn't become fully clear until 2012, when the company united all of their burgeoning cinematic heroes into one epic team-up film. Upon its May 2012 release, The Avengers became a cultural phenomenon, grossing over $1.5 billion and launching the MCU into the stratosphere, forever changing the way that major Hollywood studios approached franchise filmmaking. As a result, practically every other studio attempted to replicate Marvel's formula in the aftermath of The Avengers, and Sony was certainly no exception to this. As The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was concluding its post-production, Sony Pictures issued a press release in December 2013, outlining the studio's plans to develop a brain trust of writers, directors and producers who would help turn the amazing film series into a full-fledged shared cinematic universe, naming the likes of Mark Webb, Drew Goddard, Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci as all being part of this group, alongside senior producers Avi Arad and Matt Tolmach. In addition, it was soon announced that two projects were being actively developed: Venom, then to be written and directed by Kurtzman, and the Sinister Six, written and directed by Goddard. Although the building blocks for this approach would be seen throughout The Amazing Spider-Man 2, with the film not only introducing both Electro and the Green Goblin, but its post-credit scene seemingly setting up the Sinister Six, the planned Amazing Spider-Man 3 was to truly be the bridge between the previously standalone Spider-Man films and Sony's new interconnected universe. Plans to make a third Amazing Spider-Man film were announced as early as June 2013, with Amazing Spider-Man 2 screenwriters Roberto Orci, Alex Kurtzman, and Jeff Pinker all signing on to pen the new screenplay. The movie would be set for release in June 2016, with a planned fourth installment in the series being set for a 2018 release. Mark Webb, who was once again set to direct The Amazing Spider-Man 3, discussed plans for where the franchise was set to go next, specifically highlighting a cut scene from the second movie that hinted at the return of Norman Osborn. As Webb explained in an interview with Den of Geek,
Chris Cooper was going to come back and play the Goblin. We were going to freeze his head, and then he was going to be brought back to life. And then there was that character called the Gentleman. We had some notions about how to do it, but I think maybe we were thinking too far ahead when we started building in those things. But it was a fun exercise. I look back very fondly on those days.
While the scene is yet to be officially released, the original post-credit scene for The Amazing Spider-Man 2 would have seen the Gentleman revive Norman's cryogenically frozen head, leading to his transformation into the Green Goblin in the subsequent film. Likewise, Andrew Garfield would later discuss his involvement in the third film's development, explaining to Uproxx in 2015 that
I was actually starting to workshop ideas with Alex Kurtzman, who was going to be writing it. We thought to kind of start from the base level, the foundational level of where have we left Peter and where do we want to see him go and what's logical, and how do we build upon where we left off with this deep, desperate moment with Gwen. So yeah, we got to some pretty heavy places, and I was really excited to kind of explore it and be involved on the ground level like that.
Further details for The Amazing Spider-Man 3's plot would be revealed by Dennis Leary, who played Captain George Stacy in the previous two films. In an interview with IGN, Leary explained that the movie would see Peter adapt the spider serum, combining his father's research with the lizard formula developed by Dr. Kurt Connors in an attempt to try and resurrect the dead, in particular both Gwen and George Stacy. It was also suggested that Peter's attempts to revive the pair would lead to Gwen becoming Carnage, seemingly setting up a clash with Venom in his own spin-off film. Although it is uncertain just how far into development this version of The Amazing Spider-Man 3 got, it's interesting to note that a very different approach to continuing this story was proposed in November 2014. As part of an internal email sent to various Sony executives, the notion of making a prequel film to The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was proposed, with this movie aiming to fill in some of the gaps that existed between the two Amazing Spider-Man film stories. To quote the email verbatim,
"In a never-before move, we do a prequel to Amazing Spider-Man 2. Gwen is still alive, Norman is still alive, but increasingly getting sicker. He has seen and heard of Spider-Man/Peter Parker following the events of Amazing Spider-Man 1, and having seen that he was wounded by the police shooter, has hired a Russian big game hunter, Kraven, to track him down and bring him in. Norman believes that in Peter's blood is the key to cure him. Kraven ultimately captures Peter/Spidey and supplies Norman with vials of his blood. Norman, in an attempt to synthesize a cure, actually ends up becoming the original Goblin and transforms like the Ultimate version. Spidey and Gabi battle it out, with Gabi running away weak, and which leads us to the frail state that we see Norman in Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Whether this film would have been released as The Amazing Spider-Man 3, The Amazing Spider-Man 1.5, or a Kraven the Hunter movie is unclear. Nevertheless, the plans for a third Amazing Spider-Man film soon hit a sudden stopgap, as in July 2014, Andrew Garfield was supposed to appear at a Sony panel alongside the company's president Kaz Hirai in Rio de Janeiro, where Hirai was set to publicly announce The Amazing Spider-Man 3. For one reason or another, Garfield failed to attend the event, and Sony's executives were unhappy and even discussed moving on with their plans for more Spider-Man movies without him. It was actually around this time though that Amy Pascal had begun meeting with Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige. You see, Feige and Pascal's partnership began during the final stages of production for The Amazing Spider-Man 2, when Sony reached out to him seeking his thoughts on the film's rough cut. After this, Sony were keen on bringing Feige in as a producer, given both his immense success as the architect behind the MCU and his involvement in producing Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, with Feige eventually presenting the idea of Sony and Marvel collaborating on a new Spider-Man reboot, this one set within the MCU. While Pascal initially refused, even throwing a sandwich at Feige when he proposed this idea, the combination of The Amazing Spider-Man 3's troubled development, the uncertainty around Garfield's status, and the fact that this franchise hadn't yet performed to box office expectations eventually led The Amazing Spider-Man 3 to be scrapped completely in February 2015, as Sony and Marvel formally announced their new partnership and their intentions to reboot the beloved superhero once again. Although the announcement of Sony's partnership with Marvel Studios saw plans for a third Amazing Spider-Man film be cancelled, the studio remained keen on developing their other spin-off projects. In particular, Drew Goddard's Sinister Six film continued to be worked on throughout 2014 and 2015. As noted previously, Goddard was part of Sony's brain trust for future Spider-Man projects, and following the success of his directorial debut, 2011's The Cabin in the Woods, he was officially appointed as both writer and director of the Sinister Six in April 2014. Immediately after, Goddard got to work penning the movie's screenplay, with Avi Arad noting in an internal email in May that he had not only read an early draft of Goddard's script, but found it incredibly exciting. In a later email, Goddard would outline the overall story and theme for his Sinister Six project, stating that,
"We're doing something different. It's time to celebrate the bad guys for once. We're inspired by the classic team mission of movies, Dirty Dozen, Magnificent Seven, Guns of Navarone. We want that spirit, that swagger. If the Spider-Man franchise is the Beatles, then we're the Sex Pistols."
By this point, it became clear that this Sinister Six film wouldn't necessarily pick up where The Amazing Spider-Man 2 left off, instead being a more loose continuation of the franchise less centred around Oscorp. Instead of Harry or Norman Osborn uniting the team, Goddard's film would have been centred around a lineup consisting of Dr. Octopus, as well as the Vulture, the Sandman, Mysterio, Black Cat, and perhaps most shockingly, Spider-Man. While extensive details on Goddard's pitch remain unavailable, what is known is that the film wouldn't actually be about the Sinister Six fighting Spider-Man. Instead, the villains would team up with their longtime foe in order to stop a larger threat found in the Savage Land, with both Gog and the arrival of the symbiotes being pitched to be the film's main villains at different points. At one point, the idea was even discussed of having Peter wear the black suit during a climactic fight between the Sinister Six and Carnage, before passing the symbiote on to Eddie Brock to set up Alex Kurtzman's Venom movie. In particular, Goddard highlighted Doc Ock and the Sandman as being the two key characters in his film, with Otto Octavius' role being compared to that of Michael Corleone in the Godfather trilogy. According to Goddard, much of the film would centre around the relationship between Otto and Peter, as the villain seemingly gets a chance at redemption when teaming up with the hero to save the world, only to cement himself at the movie's conclusion as a through and through villain, highlighting the tragic nature of his character and his relationship with Spider-Man. Likewise, Goddard described his rendition of the Sandman as being the heart of the movie, claiming that his character would be pure id and the anarchic enthusiast of the team. Although no actors were ever formally cast, several names had been considered for various roles. In particular, Sony executives expressed interest in casting a high-profile actor to play Otto Octavius, with the likes of Matt Damon, Denzel Washington, Daniel Craig and Matthew McConaughey all being proposed at different points in the film's development. Sandman, however, seemed to be written with actor Tom Hardy in mind, with Goddard directly referencing Hardy's Sandman becoming a Godzilla-esque kaiju in the film's climax. Originally, the Sinister Six was outlined for release in either 2017 or 2018, intended to follow up on The Amazing Spider-Man 3. However, soon after it became clear that that film's production was encountering problems, the Sinister Six was moved up to November 2016, with plans to shoot the film in Vancouver being made in late 2014. Despite these plans, the Sinister Six movie never actually made it in front of cameras. While the project did remain alive following Sony's deal with Marvel, with the studio even at one point considering including Captain America in the film, the plug was officially pulled in November 2015. In the years since, Goddard has discussed his idea for the movie, as well as regret that he was never able to bring it to life. In an October 2018 interview with The Playlist, he stated that
Sinister Six was really fun. I wouldn't have done it had I not thought there was a real opportunity to do something different and exciting and just flat out bananas. It was very much me, and a much more commercial version of the Cabin in the Woods mentality. The punk rock mentality that led to Cabin is very much at the core of Sinister Six.
Despite Goddard's enthusiasm though, and Sony's optimism about this film, I think it's clear that this specific version of the Sinister Six wouldn't have been without its issues, as not only did it seem to contradict what had been established in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but I don't think the studio fully understood the property that they were seeking to adapt. At their best, the Sinister Six are an ensemble of villains banding together to take out their common enemy, Spider-Man, and while the hero has been forced to reluctantly team with them on several different occasions, most notably in Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley's Ultimate Six miniseries, Goddard's pitch feels more reminiscent of something like 2016's Suicide Squad than a true depiction of this iconic team of villains. I don't think Sony ever truly knew what their idea for the Sinister Six was, other than the fact that they clearly wanted a team-up movie in the same manner as Marvel's Avengers, and given the rich history of this ensemble and Spider-Man's legendary rogues gallery, it makes this project's demise ultimately seem for the best. Although The Amazing Spider-Man 3 and The Sinister Six were arguably the two most well-known projects being developed by Sony Pictures at this time, the studio had actually been working on several other films to be part of their amazing cinematic universe. Perhaps the most intriguing of all of these projects was one titled Glass Ceiling, that would be a team-up film based around several female Spider-Man characters. This project, while not part of Sony's initial December 2013 announcement, was first discussed in internal emails in April 2014, when Drew Goddard suggested to Amy Pascal about developing a film based around Black Cat and Silver Sable, tapping up screenwriter Lisa Joy to work on the film. Joy would later submit her outline in July 2014. The following month, Deadline would cover Sony's plans for a female-led Spider-Man team-up film, stating that the movie intended to release in 2017 and was likely to include characters such as Black Cat, Spider-Woman, Firestar and Stunner, in addition to Silver Sable. Although no actors were ever cast for any of these roles, several had been suggested internally by various Sony executives. In particular, Amy Pascal and Lisa Joy were apparently both keen on casting Rose Byrne as the Silver Sable, while Pascal also proposed Jillian Bell as Spider-Woman. Additionally, the idea of bringing Gwen Stacy back in some form in this film was also discussed, having her become a Spider-Girl type character, which is particularly noteworthy as these ideas were conceived before Spider-Gwen first appeared in comics in September 2014. In a more detailed outline submitted by Joy in October of that year, we learn what the film's plot would have been. As she explains,
Silver Sable wants nothing more than to be in the Wild Pack, but her father has her heading up recruitment. She's frustrated, doesn't realize her father is trying to teach her something about beating that she will learn later. Silver Sable's father and the Wild Pack are taken out early on along with Spider-Man by the villain, possibly Doc Ock trying to find an alive version of his wife in a parallel universe. Our heroes are the ones who are left behind, those who are underestimated. A big theme of the movie. It is up to Sable to assemble her own Wild Pack and stop Mr. Negative and Ock or whoever opened the portal.
In addition to this outline, several more character details would be revealed. Specifically, Joy had suggested making Gwen the Spider-Woman character, coming from the same alternate reality that Doc Ock was trying to reach, visualizing a moment in the film's third act where a Spider-Man-like character would appear and rescue the heroes, only to unmask and reveal it to be Gwen Stacy. From here, Glass Ceiling's status would become unclear, as the Sony-Marvel partnership was announced in early 2015, and it caused the studio to re-evaluate their plans for a Spider-Man-centric shared universe, with The Wrap reporting that the film had been officially cancelled in November 2015. Despite this though, the idea of doing a Black Cat and Silver Sable movie persisted, with Sony eventually reviving the project in 2017, even going as far as to hiring Gina Prince Bythewood to direct the film. However, less than a year later, it appeared that the project had been scrapped once again, with Sony instead considering reworking the project to be two separate films or adapting it into a television show, depending on the success of their current standalone projects such as the Venom movies. On the subject of Venom though, it's no secret that a spin-off film featuring the Lethal Protector had been a priority for Sony for many years, with plans to do a standalone film for the character dating back to the production of 2007's Spider-Man 3. Now, Alex Kurtzman was originally hired to helm the film in December 2013, with the project at one point being titled Venom Carnage, with a release date set for late 2017. However, while Kurtzman was initially attached, at one point Chronicle and Fantastic Four director Josh Trank was also approached to direct the Venom film. As Trank would explain in an interview with Comic Book Movie,
about a month after Chronicle came out, because I was doing all these general meetings with everybody, I met with Amy Pascal and the senior executives at Sony. It was a really cool meeting and Amy Pascal is really sweet. and everybody there is really cool. They loved Chronicle and wanted to find a project that made sense. And Amy brought up Venom out of nowhere. I'm a huge fan of Todd McFarlane in general, and Venom was just a character I've always loved. I immediately thought about The Mask. This could be like a really cool synthesis of everything about The Mask that I loved, but infused into the lore of this iconic Marvel character. We were off to the races, we made a deal for it, and I was really excited. I thought this was an opportunity to make something really charactery, uncomfortable, and break ground in terms of having this super nuanced, uncomfortable character story with the branding of a massive 4-quadrant superhero film. We turned in the treatment, and they didn't like it. That kind of says everything.
With Trank's pitch being rejected, Sony began to explore other ideas for the Venom film. In October 2014, an alternate project was pitched by Hannah Minghella, this one based on the Flash Thompson Agent Venom storyline that had recently begun in the Amazing Spider-Man comic series. However, it doesn't appear that this pitch got any further than merely being suggested, as in 2015, Venom was reworked to now be a film set outside of the Amazing Spider-Man continuity, eventually casting Tom Hardy to play Eddie Brock, and the movie was eventually released in 2018. Perhaps the most interesting and ambitious idea that was considered at Sony during this period though was actually the return of Sam Raimi, as by November 2014 the studio had begun discussing ways to bring the filmmaker back to the franchise, even proposing developing either a Spider-Man 4 featuring the return of both Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, or a film with both Maguire and Garfield's respective Spider-Men. Internal emails from Sony executives reveal that the studio aimed to bring both Raimi and screenwriter David Cope back to the franchise, although it remains unclear whether or not this idea was formally presented to either Raimi or Cope. I do find it fascinating that this idea was even proposed, as the idea of a Spider-Verse was back then very much in its infancy. Nevertheless, this idea seemed to be a backup plan in case the ongoing negotiations with Marvel Studios fell through. However, once the deal was finalised and plans to introduce an all-new version of Spider-Man in Captain America Civil War was outlined, these plans, like many of Sony's other ambitious ideas, soon faded away into obscurity. Honestly, having gone back and looked at all of the various plans Sony had in place for their amazing Spider-Man cinematic universe, I find it absolutely fascinating to think about what might have been. Although I believe that things for the most part worked out for the best, with the Sony-Marvel collaboration giving us not only a series of quality Spider-Man films, as well as team-ups with other beloved Marvel heroes, but it's also still allowed Sony to attempt their own standalone projects. With all of that said though, as someone who saw clear, untapped potential in the Amazing Spider-Man franchise, there is part of me that wishes that it found a way to continue. Admittedly, the ideas for the Amazing Spider-Man 3 that were being discussed don't necessarily fill me with a great deal of confidence, and neither do some of the other pitches being made internally by various studio executives. Nevertheless though, I do think there is a world where both a sequel to the Amazing Spider-Man 2 could have been made successfully, as well as the likes of a Sinister Six film, a Venom movie connected to Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, and a female-led team-up film. And while I do think the studio did put a team of talented writers and directors in place for all of these projects, I think their troubled productions are all signs of a larger problem within Sony during this period, as the studio seemed more focused on building a blockbuster shared universe than they did in ensuring their films met the level of quality fans had come to expect. The Amazing Spider-Man 2, a film designed to set up this larger universe, perfectly encapsulates this problem, as it's a movie filled with both incredible moments and equally rushed and poor ones, with the latter being often shoehorned in to set up future projects. And despite my optimism, it appears that if the Sony-Marvel deal hadn't been made, that direction would have been the one that these proposed films would have likely gone down. Regardless though, I still think it's fun to imagine just what could have been, and how the landscape of superhero movies would have drastically changed if any or all of these films actually made it onto the big screen, and what the future would have potentially held for the gone too soon Amazing Spider-Man. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to leave a like on the video and leave a comment down below as well. Let me know your thoughts on everything we talked about in today's video. I can't wait to hear what you have to say as always. If you're new to Owen Likes Comics, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notify bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. And if you enjoyed this and you want some more, there should be some other videos on screen right now that you might also enjoy. If you want to help support the channel and help me make more videos, you can do so over at patreon.com/OwenLikesComics. Or if you want some more of me, you can follow me on Twitter just at OwenLikesComics. But that's all for this video. Again, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll see you next time. But until then, take care and keep reading.